Hello and welcome to today's video. We're looking at question 4 of paper 1 and specifically at the report on the examination, the examiner's report on this exam, the one taken in June 2017. So it's the most up-to-date one we have. And this report is secret. I'm not allowed to show you what's inside it. I can only tell you. Okay, well, this exam is constructed in a really dumb way from the point of view of a student taking it anyway. And I'll show you why. The examiner wants this to be the most challenging of the reading questions. Well, it's very peculiar that they therefore put this last when people are starting to run out of energy or run out of confidence on the reading paper. But there you are, it's the last reading question you do. They point out in the examiner's report this is 50% of your reading marks and 25% of your overall marks in this paper. So why would you leave it till last? That's nuts, isn't it? When you get tired and you're giving away 50% of your reading marks if you do badly in this question, doesn't make any sense at all. So this is the advice I give all my students and is also in my guide. It makes sense to reverse the order of the questions in paper 1. If you do question 5 and then question 4, you will have already dealt with 75% of the marks. So question 5 is the writing question, writing to describe or writing the story. And that's 50% of the whole marks of the paper. And then you've got another 25% on this question 4. So if you run out of energy, that's less of a problem if you have only 25% of the rest of the marks to get. You've already, in theory, had a chance at 75% of them. And trust me, a huge number of students write hardly anything for question 4 and 5. I've actually asked AQA to give me the national picture, but I know in my school and one other school that I support, the number of students not even writing anything for question 5 is surprisingly large at around 10%. And there's a similar number who don't even do a decent stab at question 4. They write 1 or 2 lines and then just give up. And that's because they're already knackered or they already think that they're going to fail. And your teachers probably don't know this unless they've done a really in-depth analysis of the exam question by question. They probably won't have spotted what I'm telling you. Loads of students simply fail the exam because of these 2 questions. And the simple trick of doing the paper in reverse, the writing question first, then the major reading question, is going to boost your marks tremendously. Now, what's really interesting is your teachers are not allowed in the exam hall, generally speaking, and so they don't watch you take the exam. Why is that important? Well, because they do come into your mock exam, and in your mock exam, your teachers don't see you just giving up, or if they do, they probably threaten you with a retake or a detention. But when it comes to the real thing, and there's no teacher there, students often give up by listening to that inner voice which says, there's nothing you can do. You might as well give up now. You failed. And a load of students give in to that voice. You won't hear that voice if you do question 5 and 4 first. Instead, you'll be saying, wow, I'm halfway through this exam period and I've already aced this exam. I've already got 75% of the exam done. Instead, it will give you a massive feeling of achievement. Instead, those students give up when there's still 75% of the marks to go. And another reason that this is a pity is because in question 4, the examiner wants you to respond in a personal way. Well, that's brilliant because it means this. It means there's no right answer. It means whatever your opinion, the examiner is happy to hear it as long as you back it up with quotations. So this is a question that, if you put in the effort, is impossible to fail. Now, I've just said it's impossible to fail this question, but the examiners do a really good job of making it difficult for you to get full marks. And it's not because the question's hard, it's because part of the mark scheme is secret. I hate AQA for this. I think it's dishonest. So pay attention because I'm going to show you how the examiner's trying to cheat you out of marks here. Okay, this is an evaluation question. Remember that because it's the most important detail. This question will always ask you about an invented opinion. And so the idea behind this is it gives you something to write about rather than just sit there not knowing. But that leads us to a problem. So here's a typical opinion. A student said, Hermione makes an odd choice in choosing Ron instead of Harry. To what extent do you agree? Well, you probably read that and think, oh, I do agree with that, or I don't agree with that. Well, annoyingly, what the examiners don't tell you is that you cannot simply agree or disagree. If you do, you can only get the first level and the second level. You can't get into level 3 and level 4. Now, it's very dishonest that they don't tell you that in the question, but that's absolutely true. You cannot just agree or just disagree. Let's look at the full question to see what I mean. So the key word in this bit is to what extent do you agree? That's examiner speak for saying, I don't want you to fully agree. I want you just to partly get there. And then they're very, very dishonest here. In your response, you could write about your own impressions of, evaluate how the writer, blah, 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 support your opinions with references to the text. Well, that could is a flat out lie. You must. And the key word here is you must evaluate. Remember, I said at the beginning, this is an evaluate question. If you don't evaluate, you can't get the full marks. And it's just the same on the next bullet point. You can't say you could support your opinions with references, because if you don't, you'll fail. You must. And the examiners have done this to try and sort out students who really understand the question from those who don't, because they don't want everyone getting really high marks. The reason for that is if everybody got high marks, they would get similar marks overall, and the examiners wouldn't know where to draw the grade boundaries. So they deliberately make the questions deceptive in order to get some students to fail. And now briefly, it may be that your teachers don't know about this. So in the mark scheme to the sample paper, the ones that we've been using until this June, this was not very clear. Although you had to get some evaluation even at level 2, the examiner gives an indicative comment, an example of what would have got into level 2. And in that indicative example, there wasn't any evaluation. In fact, there was only evaluation in the comment that got level 4. So this has confused many teachers who have actually told their students that it's best either to agree or to disagree. I've had lots of comments on my YouTube channel, but the examiner's report makes clear that you must partially agree. So it turns out the indicative comment we got from the exam board was actually wrong. So now we've got that out of the way, let's look at what evaluation is. So to be clear, level 2 means you've got some evaluation. Level 3 means you've got clear, relevant evaluation. And level 4, perceptive, detailed evaluation. Well, it's difficult to tell the difference between those two, but perhaps the biggest clue there is detailed. Have you managed to evaluate all the way through your answer? Well, the mark scheme has not changed, but what the examiner is looking for to back up that mark scheme clearly has. Okay, well, it's an evaluation question. I always like to simplify things for my students so they don't have to think too much about what the question wants. So here is my top advice. If you use these 4 connectives, however, actually these 2 aren't connectives, sorry, this is tentative language, might and perhaps, if you use those 4 words throughout your answer, you will always be evaluating. Why? Well, because whenever you use those words, you have to consider more than one point of view. On the one hand this, but on the other hand that. And that is always evaluation. So rather than worrying about, oh, how am I going to prove that I'm evaluating? I just say to my students, look, use these 4 words in your answer. You will always be evaluating. you'll always get top marks. Simple as that. Once you've got that as a habit, this question becomes easy. So if the examiners wanted you to pass this question, they'd write it like this. Evaluate this statement. Hermione makes an odd choice in choosing Ron instead of Harry. In your response, you must write about your impressions of, evaluate the writer's methods in, and support your opinions with reference to the text. So make a note of that, because whatever the question says, however it's worded, this is what it should say. Begin with evaluate this statement and then replace could with must. Okay, if you've been paying really close attention, you might have spotted the second way that the examiners trick you. So the second bullet point in the question says evaluate how the writer, whatever it is, blah, blah, blah. But did you notice how when I gave you the honest art question, I changed that to evaluate the writer's methods? And that's because methods is in the mark scheme, and that's what the word how means. So another way of saying this is the examiner doesn't care how, the examiner cares about the methods. So you have to write about the writer's methods in order to get the marks. So when we look at the examiner's report, we can find out what methods the examiner has in mind. And it turns out the examiner does have some favorite methods. Well, nearly every English teacher I know teaches methods of descriptive writing this way through SOAPAIMS, and that mnemonic is this one: simile, onomatopoeia, alliteration, personification, adjectives and adverbs, imagery, metaphor, and the senses. Well, this is really useful as a way of writing descriptive writing, but it only gets you so far. So what are the two favorite methods that the examiner has? Well, here it is, the secret hierarchy, the top methods. One is contrast and the other is narrative voice. And narrative voice basically means the viewpoint that it's written in. Which character do we see it from? So the good news here is that every fiction text is built around contrast. Some teachers teach this, but possibly most don't. And it is the most fundamental skill in writing any kind of text, especially a descriptive one. So in the exam, you will always get contrast, guaranteed 100%. So I've got a big section on that in my guide if you want to know more. But when you write about contrast, because you're in the secret hierarchy there, you'll always get into the top band for that part of your answer. Okay, well, you've got to the end of my advice on this question. Well done. This last bit is going to explain why the exam board is being so unfair, because that will help you realize how important it is to work out how to crack this question. So this is the problem for the exam board. They're only allowed to give out 75% of their grades at 4 and above, and about 28% at 7 and above. So they've got to have this big spread of marks. So even if every student in the country had grade 7 skills in the exam, even if everyone did brilliantly, the exam board would not be allowed to give all of those students a grade 7. Oh no, because the government says, you can only have 28%. So this is a major problem, because imagine if everybody got in a 100-mark paper, for example, if everybody got between 65 and 80%, how on earth would you divide up the grades between grade 4 all the way to grade 7, or even, grade 3 to grade 9? How would you divide up all those grades with such a small percentage? You couldn't. So the examiner has to make sure that lots of students get low marks, because that's the only way to get the grades in. So they have to cheat you, if you like. I think this is totally unfair, but AQA probably think it's totally unfair too. But they're stuck with this rule that they can't change. So my advice to myself as well as to you is, yeah, it's unfair, so you've got to deal with it. work out how to get 100% in this question and do it. So good luck with your revision, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more.